Last time, Marlowe, Varian and Barnacle finally found the Whitefire Arcanist and delivered the package from King Emeris. The package contained a keystone from the capital city's main archway. Its magical wards had failed and the city is now in grave danger. We closed the session with the Arcanist urging the party to travel to the Open Vale with her to revitalise the ward. But she warned them that such an effort of magic would attract dangerous creatures from the darkest reaches of the Sablewood. This is the last video in the Sablewood Messengers series, and we pick up with the group's carriage as it pulls into a mysterious clearing in the perfect shape of a circle. "This is the Open Vale," informs the Arcanist. "It's a place used for strong ritual magic. It's where I first forged the ward pillars that reside on all four corners of Hush, keeping the village safe. I almost died in that ritual." "Really?" says Barnacle. "How did—" "Yes, this is the spot. Yes, here. Yes. Now come on, help me. I'm old." They take out the crate and park the wagon out of the way. The Arcanist stands over the keystone and hums. Her body starts to glow brighter, flickering in the night. Now this is usually the point in the adventure where the players get a short rest, but we did that last time. Suddenly, the Arcanist lets out a shrill cry. "The keystone has finally responded! Quickly, surround me! The ritual must begin or I'll lose the pathway! Hurry!" Her body begins glowing, brighter and brighter still as her eyes roll backwards into her head. A collection of unearthly screeches echo from the woods as nearby creatures are alerted to the arcane energy. The group feels a rumble as four ancient skeletons emerge from the ground, rusted swords in their hands, disturbed by the forces of magic being used by the Arcanist. In the distance, two forest wraiths float ominously towards the group. The GM informs the group that he's going to start a countdown die for the ritual. The player's goal is to hold off the enemies until the Arcanist's work is completed. What the GM doesn't tell the group is that the ritual die will tick down one number every time an adversary is defeated, but it will tick up every time the Whitefire Arcanist is hit with an attack. When the countdown reaches 0, the ritual is complete and the fight will end. The GM decides to start big. They have 5 fear to spend. On page 147 of the rulebook, it advises GMs, do your best to spend that fear when you have the opportunity. Spending more fear at the start of combat or during a big moment can generate a lot of tension and set the stakes. This helps give shape to the scene where the PCs are on the ropes, being reactive more than proactive as they fight to get their footing. So the GM first spends 1 fear to go first in this fight. They spend another to activate the skeleton's group attack action. 3 skeletons are within close range of Barnacle. They all move within melee range and make 1 shared attack roll. The GM rolls a d20 and adds the skeleton's attack bonus. Their bonus is 0, so it's just a straight d20 roll. The GM rolls a 13. This is equal to Barnacle's evasion score, and meets it beats it is the universal rule when they are the same, so the attack is a success. The attack deals 4 physical damage for each skeleton involved, which is a total of 12. Barnacle compares this to his damage thresholds and can see that it's within the severe damage threshold and he should mark 3 hit points. Barnacle instead uses an armour slot to reduce it by 1 threshold to major damage. He marks 2 hit points instead. Not the way Barnacle wanted to start this fight, especially as he now only has 1 armour slot left. The GM is not done. He spends another fear to activate the other skeleton. This one charges up to Marlowe and swings its rusty sword. The GM rolls a 5 on their attack roll, which is below Marlowe's evasion, and the attack misses. The GM describes how one of the forest wraiths sees this happen and lets out an ear-splitting scream. It raises a bony skeletal hand and uses its life drain ability on Marlowe. Again, the GM has to spend fear to activate this adversary. The Forest Wraith has an attack bonus of +3. It rolls a 12 for a total of 15. This is above Marlowe's evasion score of 10, so the attack hits. The GM rolls 2d6 +8 for damage and scores 13 in total. This is in the major threshold for Marlowe, but like Barnacle, she uses armour to reduce it to minor and marks 1 hit point. The GM has 1 more fear to spend, but it's always good to have at least 1 in reserve, so play is passed back to the players. Barnacle takes the spotlight first. He does not want to take another hit like the one he just experienced, and he uses his Rogue's Dodge Hope feature. He spends 3 hope to gain a +2 bonus to his evasion until an attack succeeds against him or he takes a rest. Next, Barnacle uses his dagger to attack one of the skeletons surrounding him. He rolls the duality dice and adds his finesse trait of +2. He rolls a 15 with hope. He gains a hope and GM asks him to describe what happens. Barnacle describes how his blade cuts through the air as quick as a bolt of lightning and plunges into the skeleton's torso. He rolls for damage, 1d8 +1, and gets a total of 8. This is a major blow for the skeleton, and it crumbles down dead. The GM ticks the countdown die down to 7. Before Barnacle passes the spotlight, he rolls away from the remaining 2 skeletons, right under the wagon, and becomes hidden. Now normally, if an adversary was to look under the wagon, they would see him, but Barnacle is a rogue, and at any time he is hidden, he is also cloaked. This means he will remain unseen if an adversary moves to where they would normally see him. "Coward!" shouts Varian to Barnacle, and Varian looks coldly at the wraith before them. Varian takes the spotlight and uses their Ranger's Focus class feature. They spend a hope to make an attack with their short bow against the nearest wraith. On a success, the wraith becomes Varian's focus. Varian rolls the duality dice and adds their agility trait of +2. In total, they get a 15 with fear. The GM gains a fear and will be able to make a move in a minute. But first, Varian rolls for damage. The short bow does 1d6 +3 physical damage, and Varian gets a 9 in total. But the wraith has a passive feature called Spectral Body, which means it has resistance to physical damage. Resistance means the damage is halved. You always round up in Daggerheart, so the wraith now takes 5 damage. This is in the minor threshold, and it marks 1 hit point. But let's not forget that the wraith is currently Varian's focus. This means that it must mark a stress too. Because Varian rolled with fear, the spotlight passes back to the GM, and he decides the wraith wants revenge on the mortal ranger who has just marked it as their prey. The wraith walks ominously up to Varian, and the GM spends a fear to use its pass-through action. The wraith makes an attack roll against Varian. The GM rolls an 11 for a total of 14. This beats Varian's evasion score, and the attack is a success. The Forest Wraith passes right through Varian, pushing their soul from their body and making them temporarily untethered. Varian will not be able to act again until the countdown die ticks down. The GM gives play back to the players. Marlowe wants to get involved in this fight. She positions herself strategically between 2 of the skeletons and then spends a hope to use her Rain of Blades domain card feature. If Marlowe succeeds on her spellcast roll, this spell conjures throwing blades that strike out against all targets within very close range. Marlowe rolls the duality dice and adds her spellcast trait, which is instinct. In total, she rolls an 8, with hope. The attack misses both of the skeletons. Marlowe gets her hope back, and the GM gets to make a move. A move on a failure with hope should always be a little softer. Here the GM activates the other Forest Wraith, but he doesn't attack the party. Instead, he describes how the Wraith walks ominously towards the Whitefire Arcanist, its skeletal hand outstretched, ready to attack. Then the GM gives play back to the players. "Not today," whispers Barnacle from beneath the wagon. He shuffles out, hoping to use his sneak attack, aiming his blade at the Wraith's back. He also spends a hope to use his "they don't see me coming" experience, which will give him a +2 to his attack roll. He rolls the duality dice and adds the experience bonus and his finesse trait for a total of 17 with fear. It beats the Wraith's difficulty and the attack is a success. Meanwhile, the GM gains a fear and will make a move in a minute. The sneak attack works, and Barnacle can add an extra d6 to his damage roll. He rolls a d8 plus a d6 and adds 1. In total, he scores 10 damage. But let's not forget the Wraith's resistance to physical damage, and the total damage is lowered to 5. This is in the minor threshold for the Wraith, and it marks 1 hit point. Now the GM makes his move. He describes how the Wraith turns slowly and gazes down at the little ribbit who has just stabbed him in the back. He decides to use the Wraith's memory delve and makes an attack roll against Barnacle. The GM rolls an 11 for a total of 14. Usually, this would have been a hit against Barnacle, but because the rogue earlier used his rogue's dodge and boosted his evasion to 15, the attack is a miss, as Barnacle ducks under the outstretched hands of the Wraith. The GM is not done. They spend a fear to activate one of the ancient skeletons. It moves forward towards the Whitefire Arcanist, still in her own world as she murmurs incantations. It swings its rusty sword at the old deer. The GM rolls and gets a 2. A clear miss. The Arcanist's magical aura must have distracted the skeleton. The party looks on with relief as play passes back to the players. Varian is still untethered and able to act. So Marlowe takes the spotlight. "Not on my watch," she shouts as she aims her jewel staff at the skeleton who just tried to attack the Arcanist. Marlowe spends a hope to use her experience. She rolls the duality dice and with her trait and bonus scores a total of 23 with hope, an impressive blow. Marlowe gains another hope. Before rolling for damage, she marks a stress to use her Manipulate Magic class feature. The option she chooses is to hit an additional target within range, and she chooses another skeleton. She rolls for damage and gets a 6 for a total of 9. This is enough to defeat both skeletons, and the GM asks Marlowe how she wishes to do it. She describes how the magic of her staff is so intense that they explode in a cloud of dust. The GM ticks the countdown die down to 5. He also describes how Varian, who is currently untethered, breaks this magical power and is able to enter the fray again. Varian turns and looks at the Wraith who tethered him. Revenge floods through them with every heartbeat. The Wraith is still the Ranger's focus, and Varian wants to hamper the Wraith more by using their retracting claws to scratch the Wraith and make them temporarily vulnerable. Varian rolls the duality dice and adds their agility modifier, scoring a total of 15 with fear. The scratch is successful and the Wraith becomes vulnerable, which means that all rolls against the Wraith have advantage. The GM gains a fear and gets to make a move. Now, the GM could use their move to clear the vulnerable condition on the Wraith, as described on page 102 of the rulebook. However, a key rule of Daggerheart is never to undermine the heroes, so the GM does something else. They use the Vengeance of the Vale environment feature, and spends 1 fear to summon 2 more skeletons from the ground. They rise up like marionettes, twisting and juddering and stare at the Arcanist with malevolent eyes. Then the GM hands the spotlight back to the players. Marlowe looks at the vulnerable Wraith and shouts at Varian. "Varian, together, now!" Marlowe initiates a tag team roll with Varian. She must spend 3 hope to do so. On a tag team roll, both players work together to describe how they combine their actions. Then they make separate attack rolls and choose which one they wish to use. Varian aims his bow at the Wraith's right leg. Marlowe aims her staff at the Wraith's left leg, and they both fire simultaneously. They make their attack rolls with advantage because the Wraith is vulnerable. Varian gets a 21 with fear. Marlowe gets a 19 with hope, and they choose to use Marlowe's roll. First they both gain a hope. Now they roll their individual damage dice and add them together. Varian rolls a 3 for a total of 6. Marlowe rolls a 2 for a total of 5. In total, that's 11 damage. When the player's weapons do different damage types like they do here, physical and magical, they can choose which they use. They choose magical. The Wraith is not resistant to magical damage, and 11 is in its major threshold. It marks 2 hit points and also 1 stress because it's Varian's focus. Barnacle takes the spotlight. Again he goes up against the Wraith before him, swinging his dagger like a frog possessed. If he hits, he'll be able to use his sneak attack again, not because he's cloaked this time, but because an ally, the Arcanist, is within melee range of the Wraith too. Barnacle rolls and gets a 6 with fear. Oh dear, the GM gains a fear and gets to make a move. The GM describes how the Wraith's tree-like mouth seems to twist into a smile as it stares down at Barnacle, attempting to hurt it with his dagger. He then turns and attacks the Arcanist with his life drain ability. The GM makes an attack roll for the Wraith. He rolls a 12 for a total of 15. This is above the Arcanist's difficulty of 11. However, the Arcanist does not mark hit points or stress, and any damage done to her is purely narrative. The GM describes how the Wraith places its skeletal claws on the Arcanist's shoulder, and life seems to drain from her. She slumps, but keeps reciting her incantations. She's holding on for now. The GM turns the countdown die back up to 6. The GM spends a fear to also activate the skeleton behind Marlowe. It swings its rusty sword at her. The GM rolls and gets a 19. Clearly in life, this skeleton was quite the swordsman. It beats Marlowe's evasion score easily. The GM rolls for damage and rolls a 2 for a total of 3. Not high, just a minor blow, but enough to force Marlowe into marking an armour slot to avoid marking any more hit points. The GM hands play back to the players and Varian takes the spotlight once more. The Ranger is keen to put an end to the Wraith who so rudely passed through them, and again aims their bow at the adversary's back. Varian rolls and gets a critical success. Varian gains a hope, clears a stress, and gets to roll for damage. But before Varian does, they use their Hold Them Off hope ability. Varian spends 3 hope to use the same attack roll against 2 additional adversaries, and he chooses the 2 skeletons who have just emerged from the ground. Critical hits deal extra damage. Varian starts with the highest possible value the damage die can roll, which is a 6, and then makes a damage roll as usual, adding it to that total. Varian rolls a 6 for a total of 15. This is enough to defeat both of the skeletons, and Varian describes how his arrows sever their necks and their heads topple off like coconuts. As for the Wraith, as we know, it's resistant to physical damage, so the damage is halved and the Wraith marks 2 hit points. As it is Varian's focus, it also marks a stress. It's already vulnerable from Varian's claw attack, otherwise it would have gained this condition. For defeating the skeletons, the GM ticks the countdown die down to 4. Marlowe takes the spotlight and turns to face the last of the skeletons. Using her staff like a bat, she swings at the adversary's head. She makes an attack roll. In total, she gets a 7 with fear. This is below the skeleton's difficulty rating, and the attack is a failure. The GM gains a fear and makes a move. He spotlights the Wraith near Barnacle and describes how yet again it turns slowly round and faces the little ribbit. Then uses its memory delve action, making an attack roll against Barnacle. The GM rolls and gets a 13 for a total of 16. This is above Barnacle's evasion, and the attack is a success. Barnacle's rogue's dodge has now gone, and his evasion is back down to 13. The Wraith places its hand on Barnacle's cheek and delves deep into his soul. The GM asks Barnacle to describe a terrifying moment from his childhood. I was just a tadpole, starts Barnacle, a look of sadness in his eyes. A giant scooped up me and my sisters in a huge glass jar. He carried me back to a cave where the other giants gawped at us. There was barely any room to breathe in there. We didn't know how we would get out. It was awful. A single tear rolls down Barnacle's cheek. Barnacle is now vulnerable and takes 3d4 plus 9 magic damage. The GM rolls and scores a total of 19. This is in the severe threshold for Barnacle. He uses his last armour slot to reduce it to major and marks 2 hit points. The GM spends a fear to use the Vengeance of the Vale action again. 2 more skeletons arise within striking distance of Marlowe, and play moves back to the players. Fearing for his life and haunted by terrifying memories, Barnacle decides to move away from the Wraith. "Coward!" shouts Varian. Barnacle pays them little attention as he steps in to help Marlowe. He tries to thrust his dagger into the skeleton's side while it's distracted. He makes an attack roll and also uses his "they don't see me coming" experience, spending a hope to do so. He rolls an 11 and adds his bonuses for a total of 15 with fear. The GM gains a fear and will make a move shortly, but first Barnacle rolls for damage. Because Marlowe is also within melee range of the skeleton, Barnacle can use his sneak attack and add a d6 to the damage roll. So Barnacle rolls 1d8 plus 1d6 plus 1 and gets a total of 7. This is enough to defeat the skeleton and it crumbles into dust before their eyes. The GM ticks the countdown die down to 3. Barnacle rolled with fear, so the GM makes a move. He spends a fear to use the skeleton's group attack feature, moving them into melee range with Barnacle. The GM makes an attack roll and Barnacle waits nervously. He only has 2 hit points left and no armour. The GM rolls an 18. The attack hits. Barnacle gulps as the 2 skeletons simultaneously lunge their swords into him. They deal 4 physical damage each. This is in the major threshold for Barnacle, and he must mark his last hit point. Barnacle must now make a death move, and he has 3 options. Number 1, he could go out in a blaze of glory, taking 1 action which critically succeeds, and then he crosses over into the Vale of Death. Number 2, he could avoid death, which puts him unconscious until an ally clears 1 or more hit points, or the party finishes a long rest. This might mean he gains a scar, meaning he permanently loses a hope slot. Or number 3, he could risk it all and roll the duality die. If the hope die is higher, he gets back to his feet, clearing hit points and stress equal to the value of the die. But if the fear die is higher, Barnacle is no more. If you've watched the entirety of this series, you will know that Barnacle likes to make a wager. A gambler to the end, he chooses option 3, to risk it all in the hope of eternal glory. Varian and Marlowe watch in horror as Barnacle prepares to roll. "I'll be fine," he whispers to his friends. He rolls and gets an 8 on his hope die, but a 10 on his fear die. Barnacle drops to the floor like a sack of potatoes. His eyes gaze up at the sky, not blinking. "No!" screams Marlowe. The GM gives play back to the players. Marlowe moves, almost like a hand is guiding her. She points her staff at one of the skeletons and attacks. She rolls and gets a total of 16 with hope. The attack is successful. Fury blazing in her eyes, she uses her manipulate magic once more. She marks a stress to make the attack hit the other skeleton too. She rolls for damage and scores an impressive 9 in total. This is enough to defeat both of Barnacle's murderers, and Marlowe describes how they burn, writhing in agony for what they did to her friend. The GM ticks the countdown die down to 1. Varian senses the end is near and draws their bow against the wraith before them. Varian rolls the duality dice and adds their agility trait, plus an advantage die because the Wraith is vulnerable. In total, they get a 15 with fear. The GM gains a fear and is ready to make his move. But first Varian rolls for damage. He rolls a 2 for a total of 5. Not a big blow, but enough. It's a minor blow for the Wraith, who only has 1 hit point remaining. It folds to the ground like a sack of yams. The GM ticks the countdown die down to 0. With a rumble, the keystone vibrates with arcane energy. Then, all of a sudden, a soundless explosion erupts from the Whitefire Arcanist, dissipating the last Wraith that remains. The clearing is quiet once again. Back inside the treehouse, not an hour later, the keystone sits carefully in its crate. The Arcanist, who looks even older now than she did before, sits cross-legged in an overstuffed chair. There is an exhaustion in her voice as she speaks. You fought hard. I'm not surprised, of course. The king keeps good company. I'm very glad you were there. But Barnacle, whimpers Marlowe. Yes, the little ribbit fought well. My last words were calling him a coward, but he wasn't a coward. He was fearless, to the end. Well said, good sir, well said. Now what? Asks Marlowe, trying to compose herself. The keystone will need a week, maybe more, to allow the magic to settle. I'll need to watch it carefully to make sure nothing cracks or becomes sentient or anything of the like. You know how it is. And in the meantime, after you rest and gather yourselves, have a nice hot meal and a warm bath, I have one more thing to ask of you. Now, the adventure text gives a small lead on how the adventure could continue. You could use this if you want, or perhaps build on the stories your group have collectively told and sow your own seeds for the next adventure. For instance, the little ribbit died for a good cause. He was a brave little fellow. I shouldn't be telling you this, but what if I told you there was a way to bring him back? What? Yes, very few know about it, but it's dangerous, my dear, very dangerous. It would involve travelling to a new land, one filled with intrigue around every corner. Are you ready for such an adventure? We're ready. And that's where we'll end our Sablewood Messengers adventure. This whole series has been a joy to make, and I hope you found it both entertaining and helpful in learning Daggerheart. Often when I make these videos, I make a few rules mistake, which I hope you'll forgive me for, but the fiction always comes first after all. Don't forget to like and subscribe as I have many more videos planned. And until next time, please remember that an ending is simply a pause where imagination takes over.